Nu är det dags för nästa talare. We will welcome CEO Mr. Bill Cronin. Very welcome to Shareholder Day in Stockholm. And the moderator is Ulf Boberg. Very welcome.
How are you, sir? Nice to see you. Over there. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for taking the time, and thank you to the Aktiedagen folks. It's always a pleasure for us to present Dignitana. We have a very unique company with a very unique opportunity, and it's always a pleasure for me to share what we do. I'm Bill Cronin. I'm the CEO of Dignitana AB. And the company, what I'd like to do today is tell you a little bit about who we are, the history of the company, where we've come from, what we do, and then what the future of this company looks like. So the company itself was first traded on the First North Stock Exchange in 2011. However, it was actually founded all the way back in 1999 by a Swedish oncology nurse. And she had seen the problem of hair loss for cancer patients, chemotherapy-induced alopecia, and the distress it caused patients. Knowing there was a solution to that, she sought to provide the first device-driven solution to solve chemotherapy-induced alopecia. So we are traded on the First North Stock Exchange under the ticker DIGN. As of yesterday, our market cap was 200 million SEK. As of today, it's actually 250 million SEK as a result of a favorable press release yesterday. The headquarters of the company are based, we are based in Lund, and actually most of the operations are done out of Dallas, Texas now. The product we provide to the market is the patented DigniCap scalp cooling system. And what it does, again, is mitigate chemotherapy-induced hair loss to improve quality of life for patients undergoing certain chemotherapy regimens. And what this and our mission is to provide a certain level of dignity and anonymity to patients while they're undergoing that chemotherapy treatment, as soon as the patient's hair falls out, they very clearly become a cancer patient. A certain number of patients do wish to remain a level of either anonymity or simply a couple other reasons to keep their hair versus just losing it as they would without employing scalp cooling during those chemotherapy regimens. We have 4 members of our board of directors, myself as the CEO of the company, Thomas Kelly, who is one of the other 2 Americans, one of the other Americans besides myself, is the chairman. Tom is a very experienced private equity investor from the United States and has provided significant benefit to us since joining the board a little bit over a year ago. Then we also have 2 Swedish board members, Mikael Wahlgren, who as the former chief counsel to Alfa Laval has been an incredible beneficiary for us with his experience and knowledge of the Swedish Companies Act, and then also Ingrid Atterin-Hyman, who is here today. Ingrid has been chair of several other First North listed companies, and just it provides an incredible level of value for us with her experience and insights into the Swedish marketplace. What does our company look like? Again, we are technically headquartered in Lund, but we only have a couple of employees down there that handle most of the logistics around the shipment and receipt of our original Dignitana device. We also have a 3rd employee in the European theater, Hector Lopez, who runs European sales for us in Barcelona. The rest of the employees are primarily United States based. Our headquarters is Dallas, Texas, but we also have representatives in Los Angeles, Denver, Dallas, New York, Charleston, and Miami also. The company maintains a global presence either directly, as we do in the United States and Europe, or through a series of distributors where we sell the product in markets that we don't have direct support in. And the main markets where we use our distributor network, the Middle East. We have an excellent distributor, Tesla Medical, that has fantastic contacts across the Middle East and a local presence that enables us to provide the Dignitana across markets, we would not support directly there. Australia, we have another really quality distributor, Aurora Bioscience, that has deep ties across the Australia-New Zealand region and has been able to very successfully place our device with some top facilities down there. And then finally in Asia, we have a partnership with Konica Minolta. And I'll talk more about the Konica Minolta partnership later, but Konica has a significant presence in female healthcare. 27% of their overall revenues are actually derived from healthcare at this point. Most people know them more as an imaging company. However, via their medical imaging business, they've actually developed a very strong presence in female healthcare. So we're working very closely with them to realize the tremendous opportunity that the Asian market provides. Quick look at the finances of the company. As you can see, year over year from 2017 to 2018, we exhibited basically 50% year-over-year growth. Our net revenues continue to expand on a quarterly basis, and I'll touch more on the finances later. I just wanted to make sure early on I touched that we are still very much in a growth mode at this point. What is scalp cooling? Scalp cooling, for those that may not be familiar, is a way to locally reduce a patient's scalp temperature while they're receiving chemotherapy. And by doing so, to a specific targeted temperature range, which is roughly 15 to 20 Celsius. When that is done, two physiological conditions are created. One is vasoconstriction, the constriction of the blood vessels in the localized scalp area that then inhibit the flow of chemo agents to the patient's hair follicle. The other is slowed metabolic processes. So what little chemo agents do actually reach the hair follicle aren't absorbed then by the follicle due to the slowed metabolic processes. So it's really very simple science. It's actually been around for almost 50 years in various capacities, but only in the last 5 or 10 has there been a device-driven solution to actually mitigate this problem for patients. Why do patients want scalp cooling? And as I touched on before, female patients consistently rank hair loss associated with chemotherapy as one of, if not the most distressing side effects of chemotherapy. There are a number of very difficult side effects that a patient endures, and just take a step back. My involvement from this and with this product stems from my wife's diagnosis with breast cancer back in 2011. And just prior to her first infusion, she'd found out a way to, quote, freeze your head, not lose your hair. Obviously, we're not freezing a head, but back then, in 2011, there were no FDA cleared solutions in the US. So the only way to accomplish this was with very painful and difficult to use gel caps. You would put them into a cooler with dry ice and chill them to minus 30 C, put them on the patient's head, and then have to change them every 20 minutes for like 7 hours. So she did that over 6 rounds of chemo, lost virtually no hair. And then after that, her oncologist asked me if I would help other patients do this, as roughly 8 to 10% of female patients will forego chemotherapy altogether for fear of hair loss. So that's kind of how I got involved with it. And my wife chose and wanted to keep her hair simply because our boys were younger at the time and did not want to frighten them. She did not want to appear as a cancer patient while she underwent her chemotherapy. Other patients have different reasons, but primarily there's 3 that we've seen. And it's 1, anonymity. Either you're working and you just don't want the stigma of being identified as a cancer patient. 2 is family reasons. What we see is a lot of our patients have younger children and just don't want to put them through the stress of that. And then the 3rd is simply just a level of control. What we hear from a lot of patients is so much is outside of their control while they're getting chemotherapy, the nausea, the physical discomfort, all these other things. So this gives them an opportunity just to exercise some control over one area of themselves. Before we started in the US, we did a survey. We asked a whole series of women what interest level they would have in maintaining or keeping as much hair during chemotherapy as possible. And the respondent was overwhelming. 96% of patients were interested in this. So that was, a very big part of building the foundation for the business case in the United States. Again, what's the history of scalp cooling? This goes back 50 years, all the way back to the 1970s. People were putting bags of crushed ice or frozen peas on their head. Until the science was really understood, until people understood the protocol, how long before, during, and after a chemotherapy infusion you needed to maintain that reduced scalp temperature, results were very spotty. So the company, founded in 1999, then commenced its first clinical trial in the United States in 2010, ultimately received clearance from the FDA in 2015, and we've since been marketing the product in the United States since 2015, but there are installations globally that go back as far as 2009 of the existing Dignitana device. What's the product? The product is the device on the left, not the chair. The device itself is a C3. This device is a C3. That's the legacy unit that is primarily installed around the world. And what it is the base provides a cooled liquid to the cap. You can see the blue cap up on the left. The patient, this device can actually treat 2 patients independently or simultaneously. So this is the device that has basically been in use for almost 10 years. What we are now moving to is the next generation. This is the, again, the device, the inner cap, then there's an outer cap that provides both compression and insulative capacity. And in the yellow cap, you can actually see the channels that carry the liquid that's cooled by the device through the cap, and that draws the heat away from the patient's head. We also last year launched an enhancement to the outer thermal cap, which employs the BOA drawstring system. And what this does, for scalp cooling to work, the cap needs to be really tightly fit to the patient's scalp. And by grafting this BOA cinch system onto the outside of the cap, it enables both the patient and the caregiver to really dial in an exact fit and really compress that cap to the patient's head. So we've seen patient outcomes increase fairly significantly from there. So now the next step for the company is actually to introduce our next generation device, and we're calling this the DigniCap Delta system. This device has some significant differences from the existing device in that, one, it's single patient. Especially in the United States, there are a lot of facilities that only provide one patient infusion environment. So this is more fit to that. It's 54% smaller than the other device, has a much simpler to use user interface, and the most important part is it reduces nursing time. The amount of time a nurse needs to interact with this device by almost 80%. 4 sites in the United States, especially, that's an incredibly important, and not just the United States, worldwide. The amount of time that the nurses need to actually interact with this device, if it's too much, it lends to difficulties inside rolling it out in a facility. So that reduced nursing time is what we believe is going to really accelerate uptake of not just our device, but scalp cooling in general. So this system, like the other, has an inner and an outer cap, but the cap has also been redesigned. It's much more flexible. It's more of a wrap that actually fits much tighter to the patient's head. So we're going to get a much better, closer, tighter fit, and thus better outcome with this device as well. The outer cap provides, again, thermal insulation as well as compression. What's the market for scalp cooling look like? There's over 1 million incidences of solid tumor cancers, and that's a quick note. Originally, when the device was cleared by the FDA, it was cleared for female breast cancer only. In July of 2017, the indication was actually expanded to include all solid tumor cancers, male and female. About 95% of our patients are women. The other 5, obviously, are men. So our primary market is female breast, ovarian, and uterine cancers. For those, breast is still the most popular malignancy that uses scalp cooling. The chemotherapy regimens that are used to treat it fit very well with scalp cooling. So in the US, there's 330,000 new cases of breast cancer per year, and with those, roughly 60% are applicable as patients, or roughly 200,000. breast cancer globally is the largest malignancy of cancer diagnosed in women as well. So there's a huge global market for this product. In the US, again, we're very US-centric in that I'll explain the business model in a moment, but that's where the primary driver of revenue for the company is at this point. There are tremendous opportunities globally, but as we are US focused, that's where the biggest uptake and opportunity set exists for us. So the company has a very solid foundation. It's been in business for quite some time. We were the first to obtain FDA clearance of the device. We were the first to obtain a larger indication beyond female breast cancer as well. We have a diversified stream of revenue. In the United States, we do not sell our equipment. We lease it to the facility, and then there is a pay-per-treatment. We are paid each time that device is used by either the patient or the facility. Outside of the US, typically the device has been sold and then there is either, or leased, so there is a lease revenue component but also a service revenue component. One of the really important components with the new device is the cap becomes a disposable item. Previously with the old device, there was no disposable. So it was sold, and if there was a service and maintenance contract attached to it, great. If not, there was no additional revenue opportunities. So with this new Delta device, we have an opportunity to continue that pay-per-treatment model in the US, but then expand it on a global basis as well. So that's a really important differentiator of the product. As I mentioned earlier, the market cap has swelled by basically 25% in the last 2 days, and that's directly resultant from a release yesterday about the National Cancer Network suggesting scalp cooling is a medical necessity. So that's one additional step on the road to obtaining insurance reimbursement. Right now it is directly patient pay. Obviously the time that the insurers deem this a reimbursable therapy option, the market becomes significantly bigger. On that note, roughly 20% of our patients right now are receiving some level of insurance reimbursement. By requesting it from their carrier, they're actually receiving either partial or full reimbursement for their out-of-pocket costs to use the device. So in the United States, again, it's a fairly significant market for us domestically. However, I just got back from a big trip to Australia, China, and Japan. We have an ongoing clinical trial in Beijing. We're working with Konica on a PMDA submission in Japan, but there is still, this is just in its infancy in the United States. No more than 12% of the cancer treatment facilities are presently offering this to their patients. We did a rights offering at the end of last year to shore up our balance sheet. That we received a little bit over 30 million after costs, 30 million SEK after costs from that issue. And then, again, our revenue continues to grow quarter over quarter. 2016 was the first quarter we actually initiated sales domestically in the US. So since then, we've had a 48% compound annual growth rate and an annual growth rate of just under 400%. Revenue growth has continued to increase, and you see a little bit of variability, and that's basically directly attributable to sales of devices outside the US. Our US revenue continues to increase at a steady pace, but overall, the variability in the top line is directly attributable to when we sell devices outside the US. We've managed to decrease our costs fairly considerably. When we moved the majority of our operating activities from Sweden to the United States to be closer to our primary market, we were able to achieve a significant reduction in our overall costs. So now we're operating at a cost level far more appropriate to our state of growth and stage of growth right now. Finally, the operating expenses, we've managed to keep those in control as well as we ramp up the revenue side. And EBITDA continues to increase as we raise our revenues, reduce our expenses. Our EBITDA number has continued to improve as well. Current ratio has significantly improved, obviously, as a result of the latest round of funding, and then the earnings per share, the earnings continue to, the loss continues to narrow. Again, higher revenues, lower cost base. So overall, the investment picture for the company continues to improve. What are we doing right now? The Dignitana Delta, we anticipate rolling out late second quarter, early third. This is the device that really will jumpstart growth for this company. We have a continuing demand for scalp cooling services. The clearance of Paxman was very helpful in that regard. Now there is more awareness, so there's a very big market out there for both companies. We're very interested in multi-site deals, and then the Beijing cancer trial will help us with entree to the Asian market also. Finally, getting the Dignitana Delta device out into the marketplace is our top priority. We anticipate that rollout starting late second quarter. Then we will also, we're working on the CE mark for the product now, so that gives us entree to Europe, Australia, and a number of other markets. And then we have Asia and just increasing overall demand, again, US and globally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Please come over here and we will discuss Dignitana. I think we met in last year, and you were in a very heavy investment phase at that time.
Correct.
And so you told us a little bit about yourself and why you ended up in this field. So I don't think you need to do that again. I hope your wife is
Thank you.
safe
Yes, she is.
and
She's
healthy
doing
now.
well.
So, as a Swedish company from the beginning, Swedish investors sometimes are very nationalistic. What is left in Sweden? Is Dignitana still a Swedish company?
That's a really good question. So obviously our device is still manufactured. The C3 device is still manufactured down at Videbro. Our headquarters are still one, but realistically the majority of operations are now done from Dallas, Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and you are listed on the Nasdaq First North.
We are listed at Nasdaq First North.
When will you be listed in US?
Right now we don't have any plans for that. We have so much work ahead of us right now bringing this new device to market. Honestly, our heads are down working exclusively to drive revenue growth and cash flow positivity, that the idea of moving the listing just isn't even in our
I was more
vision.
into your US investors, if they are demanding that you should be relisted.
Well, I'm the largest U.S. investor, so I've got about 9.5% of the company, and this is a very long-term investment for me. So whether honestly, where it's listed is not my concern now.
When I Google when I search on Google on hair loss and chemotherapy and hair loss in general, I think there is an endless list of treatments.
Well, there is for hair loss, not necessarily for chemotherapy-induced hair loss.
No,
sure.
but many people, they don't distinguish. Hair loss is hair loss, etc. So what about competition? I know there is a Swedish company that had a similar type of cap.
The other company is Paxman, and they're headquartered in Huddersfield, England.
Okay.
Really good competitor. They keep us moving forward very rapidly, but they are the only other competitor that is trying to solve the chemotherapy-induced alopecia hair loss problem.
Okay.
The rest of any other hair loss, there's a million quote fixes, but living proof they don't work.
So what you say is that you go for the regulatory approved, and there could be some reimbursement in that, and I think that is a driver to increase the revenue if you can claim reimbursement for your treatment.
Correct. Yeah, as I mentioned, a number of patients already are receiving some level of reimbursement, some fully. Aetna has determined that scalp cooling is a medical necessity. The NCNN designation from yesterday has just another step in the process. There is legislation pending in the state of Texas where we are to make it reimbursable as well. So it'll happen, either in full or in partial reimbursement. So, this is we actually applied to the American Medical Association last summer for what's known as a CPT code, and that is the code that a hospital could bill a patient's provider for reimbursement, and the AMA's take was there's just not enough usage of this yet. It's too new.
Yeah.
Until there is a more widespread usage, they view it positively. There's tremendous amount of literature and data on the quality of life benefits of scalp cooling. So until that time, you'll see, again, incremental steps towards full or partial reimbursability.
Yeah. For me, it's also understandable that you go to US because, for example, in Sweden, I think there are only 3 device areas that are reimbursable, and hair loss due to chemotherapy is not reimbursable.
One of them. No, that's
correct. You say, I saw somewhere that FDA asked for more data if you would expand the label to other cancer treatments. And my question to myself was, why there is no difference. If you get the same chemotherapy for one tumor or another, you will lose your hair due to the chemotherapy. So wouldn't it be better to, wouldn't it be more logical to say that the clearances for use of chemotherapy that causes hair loss?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
And not put it or hook it up to a cancer, breast cancer or whatever.
Its efficacy is tied to the underlying chemotherapy regimen, not the cancer malignancy. So, I mean, you're exactly right. However, I think, as I mentioned, the original clinical trial was commenced in 2010. By middle of 2015, the FDA still had not ruled on the clearance of the device. And originally, Dignitana had requested that the indication be for all solid tumor cancers. FDA came back and said, we're just struggling with that. Reduce it to the population of the clinical trial, which was female breast, and then come back and ask for the larger indication later. So that's what resulted in that was the 2-step process. So originally, the clearance covered female breast cancer patients only. Then we did another 510K to FDA in 2017 that expanded the indication to exactly what you're suggesting, all solid tumor cancers.
Yeah. And what about HIV/AIDS? Because they lose hair due to the medication.
Yes.
And there are other immunological diseases.
Sure. There are other immunological diseases. There are neurological diseases, MS. There are things for which cooling of the brain can be quite effective. However, you know, we're really focused. There's a very large market for the therapy option that we know how to take care of. To get into those any other fields would require very lengthy, time-consuming, and attention-draining clinical trials that we just don't have the bandwidth to handle right now. So our marketplace is very clearly defined. There's very clear opportunity set for us, and that's what we're focused on maximizing.
And when you sell, or when you place them in US in the clinic, and you get paid for uses, then you don't need to worry about off-label use.
That is correct. I mean, off-label use does occur. However, once the indication was expanded for all solid tumor cancers, the number of off-label uses obviously went down dramatically. So originally, where hospitals had the ability to treat female breast cancer patients, they were also obviously treating other regimens that use, or other malignancies that use the same chemo regimens, and those were technically off-label. But once that expanded indication was granted in 2017, that drove most of the other off-label usages out.
Okay. According to your end-year report, you had 22 million SEK in your cash balance.
Yes.
The 30 plus that you raised, is that included in the 22, or is that another 50?
The 22, no. Right now, I mean, that's exactly where our cash balance
is.
So the
33 is already registered?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So how long will those 22 take you?
That's a really good question. From a continuing operations perspective, the company is very close to break even. The vast majority of our financing activities over the last year have been centered around the new device development process. That's essentially finished. So the the next phase in the company is a very large-scale rollout of this new device. That'll be a capital-intensive operation, but one that should be satisfied via debt versus equity. So from the ongoing operations of the company, as I mentioned, we're very close to break even now. And once the vast majority of the investment in the new device is behind us, we're pretty good to go.
So we will see break even during 2019?
I would hope.
Very good. Last question. What's the purpose with the Beijing study?
That's a great question as well. To date, there is no data set of efficacy of scalp cooling on an exclusively Asian population. Okay. So as we pursue the PMDA clearance in Japan in conjunction with Konica Minolta, they have felt if we could append that with some efficacy from an Asian population, that would be helpful.
Okay. Okay. Good luck to you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.